we've had this funny thing where we've had these great shifts, whether it was mobile and then, Web 2. And then I think the last few waves, whether it was crypto or VR or metaverse, have led people to believe that, we're kind of like the industry that cries wolf, like this is going to change everything. And it changes a few things. But because I think myself, people like yourself are kind of unique in that we're high agency, have ideas, and kind of understand how this stuff works, like understands server client, understands understand how a house gets built.
APIs and SDKs and just these words that
Yeah.
maybe we couldn't actually deconstruct ourselves, but we knew how important. It's almost like a kind of conjuring, like a kind of like
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're good.
I think we're golden.
I think we're good. Yeah, it's just I thought WhisperFlow would be dead when Claude Code now allows audio voice recording, but I'm still using WhisperFlow.
Yeah, it's funny. I subscribe to Every just to kind of like stay up, and they have their little monologue guy, and I just grabbed that, and I've been using that. Before that, I had some like one-time fee local model thing that I was using, but I think I canonically use WhisperFlow like Kleenex. It's like the brand that people recognize as the thing you talk to your computer with.
There's a lot of these things that like come out and you think everything's going to change, and then it doesn't.
Yeah.
The OpenAI browser, I was like, oh, it's over. I'm never going to use Chrome again, and I don't even know if I have it on my machine anymore.
Totally. Yeah, it's funny. Some part of me thinks it's all like fractals and luck and who could know, but it does seem like nothing ever changes, and then some things just radically change everything. It's hard to call it. The idea that like a terminal-based UI would radically change everything. You're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Not a GUI. A terminal-based UI that connects to other CLIs. Huh. Okay.
Here we are. Okay, so the intro is Trevor McFedries. Thank you. This is Let's Vibe, the podcast. The focus is broadly on creativity in the age of AI, but then specifically on generalist creative folks who have always been deep into technology, but never quote unquote learned, computer science. And what's life like, and what are you up to? And I think with you in particular, I want you to kind of go through your story, but I think we met, I want to say, probably 10 years ago, just kind of randomly. I think it was through probably a mutual investor friend, and I came and saw you, and you were working out of Bad Robot?
Correct. Yep. JJ's
Do you
office.
want to just situate that, kind of let us know, where was that? What were you up to? Because you were working on Little Michaela.
Yeah, there's some good lore there actually, because the reason, so I was working on Little Michaela. I had this, idea. I wanted to build Pixar for music, or kind of this modern Disney where you had this technology stack that enabled storytelling and kind of an emergent kind of storytelling, which I thought of as being panel by panel, but instead of in a comic book, it was on Instagram or kind of social storytelling. And I created this character, Little Michaela, and, thematically being technical enough to get an MVP off the ground. It was lurking weird Russian VR porn message boards to find shaders and skin stuff, because no one did bipedal human stuff. But got Michaela rolling, and one of my there were lots of young people that were into it, and one of them was JJ Abrams' daughter Gracie, who is now a pop star, a bona fide pop star. But she, I think, just brought it up to JJ, who's brilliant, and his wife Katie is probably more brilliant, which is wild. She's his business partner, and people think of him as being, a writer, producer, composer, do it all guy. But Katie is, to me, equally, if not more of a force. And so anyways, Gracie brought it up to him. He was like, hey, would you want to learn old-fashioned storytelling if you want to teach me about the future? And I was like, bro, I will do whatever you want. You are a god. I just want to hang out in proximity. And so he gave us some office space and let us hang out and work on some stuff.
I mean, when I think about...
So I'm going to do one of these. I'm going to talk to the... that's probably a pause. Okay, we're back.
Yeah, I guess recently we're in this age of agents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's LLMs, and there's AI, and there's all this other stuff, but it feels like there's this relentless pursuit towards agents. And when I think about agents, and when I think about autonomous agents, and when I think about virtual characters as we move into sort of robotics in the future, Little Michaela to me is seminal. Right? How do you feel given where we are? What is a pattern recognition? Is it a kind of a culmination of that dream of that vision of things gone in different ways? Like, I'm really, really curious.
Man, I could talk about that for probably an hour in of itself. But I think for me, it's a mixture of excitement and also, I think at the same time, some disappointment. But disappointment just stems from this idea that, in all of these revolutions, you've lived through a few of them. There are, and that's what I'm kind of drawn to. Is like, here's a radical technology or idea or concept, and I want to be next to it, and I want to like change the world dramatically. And here's a utopian vision of how the world looks 100% different. And the reality is like things end up looking 5% different, and maybe that 5% is people you're more ideologically aligned with, and that's worth it in the end. But I think for me, the idea that using the generative media, these tools to tell stories and do compelling stuff was always really exciting. And I think we're still kind of hung up on AI, UGC, and virtual slop peddlers to ship, to market calorie tracking apps to people who are less sophisticated on, slop social. And so, I'm hoping it evolves beyond that. I think what's really fun is in parallel, some of this agentic stuff is exciting. I think the flip side of that is a lot of it also is just the slot machine. You can go out, you can type something into a prompt, and you can get magic one out of increasingly less and less attempts. And that variable rewards pattern is sticky, whether people are actually building real shit with it, TBD. But I'm seeing some really interesting seedlings. I think there's going to be some cool stuff emerging. And so I will say a bit of both. And so I could talk about the generative media side or the kind of more pure agentic stuff, but there's some exciting stuff and some depressing stuff. Like always.
Can we go back a little bit, like origin story?
Totally.
Iowa?
Country boy, country cooking.
Factory town, finding the internet as an escape.
Definitely. I was just, my mom, so I have a newborn, 10 days old. My mom was by today helping us out. And, someone had asked, like, how'd you get into computers? My mom was just kind of joking, like, one of the first things you ever said was, I want a pewter, I want a pewter, I want a pewter. She was like, what the hell, you want pewter? Like the metal? Like what? Why would you want pewter? And I don't know where I got this idea, but I've always been intrigued by computers. For whatever reason, I remember watching that movie Hackers with Angelina Jolie as a kid in Iowa and being like, yeah, I want to go to raves. I want to be on my computer. I want to be in New York City. And we got 2 out of 3. We got raves. We got a lot of computer time. And we got Los Angeles. And I wouldn't
But never New York City?
Never. I dated, a girl there for a long time, and I was there a ton. But I think I was lucky enough to capture a lot of magic. I was 19 and 2004 and going to New York, and it was like that moment of Williamsburg and the Strokes. It was insane. I got to ride that lightning, but always kind of come back to LA. I think we were talking a little earlier about how nice it is to kind of have a place where you can escape and get a lot of good things done. I had kind of this Midwest work ethic, but I was living in LA where I could kind of isolate myself and get a lot of things done. And so it worked out quite nice. But yeah, I grew up in Davenport, Iowa, in the Quad Cities, in what was basically a factory town that I saw get crushed by NAFTA and some of those trade deals in real time. There was Alcoa, the aluminum plant, and John Deere and Oscar Mayer. And a lot of my friends' parents worked at those places. And the really bizarre thing about this moment is I remember using 3.5 Sonnet, and I had this haunting feeling where I was like, oh shit, like the things that happened to my blue collar friends are going to happen to my white collar friends. This is going to be, how are we going to manage this? And so here we are, figuring it out in real time.
Music. So when did sort of music was always been a part of it for you?
I think so. I mean, yes. My mom also today, we were talking.
Pewter and music, Iowa? Was that sort of how it all, was
Yeah.
that the soup?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of armchair therapist summary would be like, my mom moved to LA, met my dad, black guy from LA, has me, they split up when I'm 1. I moved back to Iowa with basically her whole Scottish, my mom's Scottish, strawberry blonde, blue-eyed white lady, and I'm this like little black kid in small town Iowa trying to make sense of the world. And I think at some point recognized I was different and liked being different and was, always good at school, but wasn't super interested in it, and got to go to Iowa City, which is where like the University of Iowa is, and got to walk through the Ped Mall and saw like alternative culture, whether it was like Pearl Jam and that stuff, 90s. And I was intrigued, and I got into punk rock via my friend Nikki's older brother. We went to these things called lockouts. It's like these churches would like let kids kind of like hang out and do whatever they want inside these like locked in confines, and there'd be some like gospel, and there was a Christian punk band, cover band, and they were playing all kinds of covers, and they played a song that by a band called MXPX. And I remember asking her older brother, I was like, what is that? He was like, oh, it's this band MXPX. And I was like, amazing. And I went to Sam Goody at North Park Mall the next day, and I asked them for an MX. I was like, I heard this punk rock band. It was like XX something, and they were like NoFX. And I was like, yeah, NoFX. And I got a NoFX CD, and it was not them, but it just kind of led me down this path from NoFX to Minor Threat to grindcore to whatever. I got really curious and got into straight edge punk rock, and that was a huge part of my life. And so I think music and computers enabling that kind of deep dive into music is definitely at the core of who I am.
And DJ Skeet?
Yeah, DJ Skeet Skeet. That was like that was an interesting one. So I was living in Iowa and playing in really metalcore bands. I always wanted to be in hardcore bands like 10 Yard Fight or Gorilla Biscuits or something like that. But this is the age of Slipknot in Iowa. Like nothing bigger has happened in Iowa ever. And so everyone wanted to be in like metalcore bands, which was cool. And then I moved to California when I was 16. I was living with my dad, and then my mom and sister moved out and kind of followed. But I wanted to be in like a band in LA. And this was like this indie rock moment in LA. And I was like, what the fuck is indie rock? Like, I didn't want to be in Rooney or Phantom Planet or any of these things that were kind of like all the rage at the West Side schools in LA. And so I just thought maybe I could learn how to make hardcore on my own. And I pirated Reason, and I started trying to program drums that sounded like the music I liked, and discovered drum and bass. And was like, I guess this kind of sounds like the stuff that I like, but it's all electronic. And then discovered UK Garage, and Iowa had gone to like raves and cornfields and been into like tangentially like Bad Boy Bill and Happy Hardcore, but there wasn't really a connection between playing in bands and that stuff. It was just kind of a place to party and fun, insane music. And for whatever reason, that moment in LA and eventually the Bay Area when I was there, they all kind of gelled, and I was like, man, these are the same things. Like, I like hardcore shows because it's community and culture and high energy. And I like going to these raves because there's like a shared language and community and obviously like a high energy music. And I think that was this through line that kind of connected those dots. So DJing was born out of that.
And college in Bay Area?
Yeah, so moved to California for sports. I was an athlete all growing up and was starting to get recruited. My mom was like, you should go to school in California, you should stay with your dad and figure out how to do that. And this is something I haven't talked about too much publicly, but like basically I committed to play football at Georgetown out of high school. I was like one of those guys that had like, decent grades, decent SAT score, and like pretty good athlete, but was
What
like
position?
in high school I played running back, linebacker, wide receiver, but in college I played safety. And so I was one of those guys that could have played like low D1 football. And I kind of was fixated on that. I wanted to be an athlete, and I was like, I'm going to go play D1 football. But Georgetown was like in the Patriot League. It was, it was like a good education, and, long story short, they don't give full scholarships. They do these grants. And at the time, I had been promised a full grant, and they came back to me in the spring and said, hey, actually, it's going to be 30%. And I just couldn't afford to do that, and had to scramble. And one of my coaches, his brother worked at San Jose State, and was like, hey, why don't you come here and you can do this thing called a gray shirt, where you take less than 12 units for a semester and you're the first scholarship in the next class. And so you come in the fall, hang out, train, and then start spring ball. This is like, I've never talked about this, but basically I went to go do that, and the coaching staff that guy was on got fired after the fall. And so I had a whole new coaching staff that I was playing. Was called a rover. It was like a hybrid safety linebacker, and they were moving to a more traditional defense. This is funny for this podcast. But long story short, I pulled the ripcord and said, F it, I'm going back to LA. I'm going to figure out the next moves. I'm going to make music and do design stuff and do internet stuff and figure out my own path, because this football
When
thing,
was this? What year? 16?
2005.
Okay,
So,
five. Okay.
yeah. So I graduated high school in 2004, went to the Bay Area. I think it was in like 2006, actually. And so I was like pretty excited by things on the internet, dance music culture. LA was like really interesting. My friends were throwing these parties at a place called Cinespace. There was like all this kind of like emergent indie culture, and the internet was a big part of that. Blogs, house. I created a blog where I was sharing music and Gossip Girl episodes or whatever I wanted. And it was really exciting. So I was like, okay, this football thing isn't working. I'm just gonna go back to LA, go to community college. Maybe I'll transfer to El Camino and play football there, or transfer to like, a school and play football there afterwards. But I was just gonna figure it out. And then music started working.
And this was mid Web 2, late MySpace, early Facebook.
Yeah. I mean, part of one of the reasons why I wanted to go to San Jose, beyond, I was like really the only opportunity, was I remember like reading on blogs about like Silicon Valley angel meetups in San Jose, and like you can bring your business plan and like pitch. And I had been building these like, I remember in high school I built this website called Mirror Pic, where you could like post a mirror pic, like MySpace style selfie, and like a hot or not style function to like try to like, and at the time I was building e-com sites for mom and pop stores, so I would just use like Xcart, these like PHP, e-commerce things, and just like skin them for mom and pop. And so like I was like, man, I want to go to Silicon Valley. This sounds so fun. Of course, I had no time with football practice and stuff, but that was like the idea.
You tasted it. You were there.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was like, I don't know, as a kid from Iowa, moving to LA was crazy for me, because you'd meet people who had done all these impressive things, and you'd be like, you must be a genius. But it turns out there is a guy who took a risk. And then to go to Silicon Valley, San Jose, and see these people and be like, wait, you're just a guy. I'm just a guy. Maybe I could do this too.
And when did that sort of, I mean, because now when I think of you, I just think of you as like an advocate for the creator economy, right? I think of you as sort of like a leader of these like emerging platforms to like unlock and enrich creators as first-class citizens. God bless you. When did that kick in?
I mean, this is funny because it is kind of linear in that moment we're talking about where I'm in the Bay Area. I'm really enamored by technology, and I moved back to Los Angeles to kind of figure out this music thing and joined this like rap group called Swayze. It was kind of like a hodgepodge thing. A friend who was in a rock band, a guy who was sleeping on his couch, making demos for Mickey Avalon, other kind of rappers in the LA area. And Interscope hears it and is like, hey, we want to sign you guys as a band. And it's like, hey, we're not a band. And then they're like, here's a check. And we're like, we're a band. We are a band. But what was interesting is I got to live the kind of the last gasp of like the legacy Hollywood Leviathan, where like Jimmy Iovine signed us. Like the next day, almost, we're on TRL. We're signing CDs and Tower Records. There's a Pontiac commercial with us in it. Like they're putting
This is
out
for Swayze?
It's for Swayze, yeah, the rap group wasn't called Swayze. And you're feeling him push all the buttons, and like the buttons aren't working anymore. And they're like, wait a minute, like, the priorities I think that quarter were like Snoop Dogg, the Pussycat Dolls, and Swayze. And, we're getting the full push and things aren't working, and I'm getting pulled into rooms like, do you know what MySpace is? And I'm like, yeah, I know what MySpace is. And they're like, can you talk to us about it? And I was like, yeah. And like I'll never forget getting pulled into Jimmy's office, and his office at Interscope had like 5 different doors. I just remember there were all these different places you could enter from. And then we get pulled in, and he's like talking to us, and he's like, sorry guys, had to fire my chef. You got the best chef in the world, but like, you got to fire him every 6 months, because maybe they make incredible spaghetti. They make spaghetti. That's what they do. And so I got to turn him over every so often. And I'm walking in, and I'm like a kid, and I'm like, oh yeah, you got to fire your chef every 6 months. Okay, noted. And I'm just like blown away by this guy. And then he's asking me these questions about, MySpace and kind of emergent technology that I was like, you guys don't know anything about this stuff. And so I felt quite emboldened in that moment. And the flip side of that is, my desire to kind of, I guess, like my desire to support creators is that I saw that last moment where I would go meet producers who had one hit in the 90s and a $5 million house in the hills. And then I was like, oh, that's what we're going to do. And I got out there, and it was like, just kidding. All of that money and stuff that you thought was going to happen is gone. And even though you're having impact and people are, we're playing shows in Germany and all over the world and top 10 albums in the US. Like, I was still, paying $400 a month to share an apartment in East LA and begging for gigs to, make $100, $200 DJing just to get by. And you're like, what is happening? And so that was always this kind of confusing thing for me, is that it was very clear to me that people love this stuff. That you would ask them why life is worth living, they wouldn't say derivatives or bonds. They would say music, art, fashion, dance. And I can kind of squint. Yeah, culture. Like, I could squint and remember when, capital met that demand and that desire, and people could start families or do the bare minimum. And for most of my adult life, it's been my friends who are literally sometimes playing arenas or otherwise and can't afford to start a family. And they're like, yeah, well, I've got, 10 people on stage with me, and I'm, I got tour buses and and overhead, and I'm repaying the label for this. And you're like, that's bizarre. How do we solve this? And so I've always believed in technology being a part of that solution and trying to figure it out still.
And Little Michaela came out of that.
Totally. Yeah. So, I quit Swayze. I had toured and kind of produced and done my solo thing as a DJ, and that was fantastic. I got to travel the world and play festivals and do all this stuff.
You spent time with Kanye?
I did. That was a bit later on. I had, that was later on, but I had, had the opportunity to produce directed videos. I've always been someone who's like, yeah, I can figure it out. And with all kinds of, Katy Perry's and Kesha's and Stevie Aoki's and across a pretty wide spectrum of people. But I started managing and producing an artist named Banks. And that was really fun because I got to do all the creative direction. I got to produce the music, bring my friends in, whether it was like Shlomo or Lil Silva, and kind of build this universe. And we had a lot of fun. And I ended up realizing...
What years are we talking?
Sorry, yeah, this is like 2011, 2012. And so I had... So it gets connecting the dots between Swayze, and then I had joined Spotify. D.A. Wallach and Sean Parker were kind of figuring out this thing, Spotify, and bringing it to North America. And again, they wanted someone that could kind of like...
I was doing Turntable at the time, so we were like similar circles.
Legendary. Talk about iconic shit. Yeah, and they were just like, we need someone that can talk to like Swedish geeks and Hollywood suits. Do you want healthcare? And I was like, actually, yeah, that sounds cool. Again, this is kind of like broke artist thing. I was like, so a steady paycheck and healthcare? I can like go to the gym and maybe have a girlfriend? Huh. Okay, I'm listening. And so I joined Spotify, and they were really cool. Like Dan Eck and those guys were like, we want you to still make music, still produce, still do the thing. And so Banks, for me was an opportunity to go and kind of do this stuff with a little more stability and be fixed in one place. And, in that journey, realized I didn't want to be a music manager. Like, it's pretty fucking thankless and miserable. But now that I understood the machinations of this beast, like as an artist, it was just like, publishing, don't worry about it. Just sign this thing and you be creative. Or it was like, how do my tour deals get done? I don't know. I have an agent and he takes a cut, but just give me a bigger number. And when I became the manager, I had to start learning these things. And for me, I was like, man, there's all of this rent seeking in the middle of these things. And if we could create like a pass-through vehicle for the people that are creating all this value, the writers, the producers, the choreographers, it could be really interesting. And that was kind of the seedling where it was like, Rihanna isn't writing these songs, choreographing these dance moves, styling these outfits, but she's capturing 70% of the value. A lot of my friends are that periphery. Could we make value go to them? And that was, partnered with my interest in Hatsune Miku and, emergent kind of like Asian idols, AKB48, all this stuff. I was like, maybe there's a world to do that in the West. The more I started thinking about it, the more I'd also read Creativity Inc. at the time, and I was like, man, there's probably a world to partner this technology. I bet that like AR and VR, I believe at the time VR, I was like, I bet virtual reality will accelerate adoption and advances, and we can kind of ride this wave in a different way, where like we can kind of glue some of these things together to make something cool. And that was kind of that was how Little Michaela started. It was really just like, can I figure out a way to pass more value back to my friends? And I think I have an idea that involves technology, so let's just start poking and then go down the idea maze and see where we end up.
Was it inspired by something you saw in Japan or Asia? What kind of what was the genesis of I'm going to make a artificial character that people think is real? Because at the
Yeah,
time, it was not obvious. Now, it's all over the fucking place, right?
yeah, ish. I mean, like Miku, Hatsune Miku, who's kind of like the big Japanese, one people recognize, who still will play 30,000 cap Tokyo Dome, like massive shows. I bet an inspiration, but Miku was a Vocaloid, so it's kind of a different thing. Miku was basically a synthesizer. You could, and you could basically put, sounds that sounded like a human voice on a keyboard and play them to get a voice. They called it a Vocaloid. And people, because Japan is Japan, the best, they had named these characters on these Vocaloids. One of them was Miku. And because there is this otaku culture, they just started extending naturally in kind of like a real open source, decentralized way, this character. And the company figured out ways to license some of the songs that were being created by other people and the IP, and they built this pretty impressive thing. I was more interested in kind of a more centralized solution. In parallel, I had gotten really into Pixar, I got really into Disney, and I was really enamored with this idea of Disney being a technology company, and a technology company that centers storytellers. So externally, it felt like, oh, this is a media company. But Disney to me is Imagineers. It's Imagineering, and it's
They had Danny Hillis, they had Bran Ferren, they had some amazing technologists,
amazing technology.
amazing deep thinkers.
Even when you go to Disney World and you go on some of these rides that have been around for 60, 70 years, the simplicity and the ideas and the sleight of hand, that stuff was always so compelling to me, where it was like, whoa, they just kind of poked holes in a dark room and I'm riding around in this roller coaster and lights peering through it and it's magical. That is fantastic. And so to me, the dream was, okay, can we pull my favorite minds into a room, and can we figure out elegant ways to tell stories and have technology enabled stories for this new future? And in parallel, can we repatriate value back to the people that I think deserve it? And can we also, shape the hearts and minds of a generation the way X-Men or other comics and media shaped me? That was it. I've always been kind of overtly political and passionate, and it was like, hey, there's a lot we can do here. This feels like a good way to spend a decade of my life. Let's try.
But at the time, I can imagine it's a big production in terms of all now you whip up
Yeah.
you can make an agent like this that is using generative video, generative imagery. You have a wholesale of at foul.ai or any of these marketplaces. Boom,
Yeah.
you're good. But at the time, what did it behind the scenes? I mean, most of us who saw Little Michaela, it was an Instagram account, but behind the
Yeah.
scenes, what was involved to put that together?
Yeah, it was insane. So in the beginning, it was just me. Basically, it was like picking up Maya, other kind of 3D tools, and digging through tutorials and trying to glue stuff together. Thankfully, I had a bit of a design background. I could use Adobe Suite, and I could figure out ways to kind of get the idea across. And what was really amazing in that moment is what it kind of reinforced for me is you can have all the technology in the world, but at the core of it, what the fans cared about was the story. There was this moment where I was like, oh my God, wait till we have video. And we finally got video working. And the fans were like, yeah, of course she walks. What? I don't care. What's happening with her and Noah? Did she break up with him or what's going on? And so that kind of stuff was really comforting, and I think probably informative for people that are trying to use these tools. The photo reel, chasing the highest end graphics is a loser's game. Telling great stories is the important piece. All that is to say that the beginning was just me. I remember Isaac Bratzel, who was basically our CTO. I found him on ArtStation, and he had a profile where he had built a 3D version of Brock Lesnar, I believe, and he had fully rigged it so you could control the face. And most people didn't do this stuff because that uncanny valley, it was just toxic. And so you either did a Hello Kitty or a dancing squid, or you worked on Benjamin Button, where you were doing face replacement and stuff. There wasn't really people trying to do a truly bipedal human character with a facial rig that wouldn't repel people. And it was him and these guys in Serbia 3 Lateral, who are now owned by Epic Games and have outsourced, or I guess have kind of opened up their, I think it's called MetaHuman now. I basically cornered Isaac at a Go Get 'em Tiger in Los Angeles and was like, hey man, so hear me out. Fake people on the internet. Like, not enough for no. I was like, I have this thing I want to build, and it's just me. And I would.
Again, give me the year.
This is 2016.
Okay, so 10 years ago, fake people on the internet.
I mean, like the pitch was, I think that the pitch for BCs was Kylie Jenner times 1,000. Kylie Jenner that speaks Mandarin, Portuguese, English, Spanish, and will be a bridge to this kind of like spatial computing was the word I was using at the time, future. Digital goods, it's funny, weren't even a part of those pitches, but they kind of came before the spatial meta conversation. And for Isaac, it was like, dude, you have a very unique skill set, and I want to put together, the A team of people that can do these kind of things. Let's figure out how to do this. I'll get the resources so that we can rethink all of this and try to figure out how to build a pipeline that allows us to tell stories at the pace of the internet. And whether or not the kind of pitch for him was like, whether or not this works or not, we'll have a technology stack that is forward facing and we can figure out how to sell it or whatever, because AAA games take 5 years and movies take 5 years, and media isn't going to work that way in 10 years. Like, there's just no way. It's got to get turned around more quickly.
You also had and have a pretty big audience for Little Michaela, and that isn't easy.
No, and it was easier in 2016. There was still a way to grow your audience organically. It more or less people forget, but like it's more or less been turned off. And I think For You pages have a very different dynamic in the and so.
Just give a sense, like how what was the growth year by year of Little Michaela after the first year? How many followers?
The first year it's more or less me. The path to 500 Instagram followers is me creating images that really speak to a very narrow audience of like Silver Lake, Bushwick, people that I could talk to. And it's funny looking back on it now, because really Michaela in the beginning was like Dazed magazine, like this is a fun kind of creative coder project. And that was the probably path to the first 5,000 followers, which is like, hey, this is kind of a cool vision of the future in a pre-Trump world where technology was really celebrated, And then in post-Trump, technology started having the stigma. Oh, you've like the downfall of democracy. And all of a sudden it started getting this like Black Mirror narrative that got clicks. And so we got kind of pulled into that. And whether we liked it or not, that also created a lot of attention for us via YouTube, because people like Shane Dawson and these kind of like conspiracy YouTubers would come up with stories about Michaela, and it would bring it in front of like, these ravenous, super passionate young people. And it was still really novel at the time. Like, people would be like, oh, how do you make a brand big? Like celebrities. And I was like, I've done the celebrity thing. Like I've worked with Katie. I've never seen anything like a YouTuber pointing traffic at my thing. Mm-hmm. It's fucking nuts. And so, Shane probably got us to like 50, 60,000 people. Shane, the kind of like YouTube-ish people. And once we had that base of like very online, very young Gen Z at the time, 12, 13, 14, it was kind of perfect because they were interested in stories, they were interested in the internet, and they weren't attached to this idea that celebrities needed to be real. They were just like, I'll never touch Lady Gaga. I'll never touch Little Michaela. That's the same thing. I just interface with them via screens. And so at that point, the burden was on us to start telling great stories. And that's when the narrative shifted from like, here's a commentary on what's happening in Silver Lake to, in working with JJ, honestly, because around that time, JJ and Brian Weinstein and those guys at Bad Robot like come in here and hang out, and JJ would give me an hour of his time while he's like writing the next Star Wars. And I'd be like, totally, you got bigger problems. But like, how do you plan out a long story? I'm asking the most like basic ass like New York Film Academy day one stuff. And he's like, oh, well, for what you're doing, it kind of reminds me of like network television, where you got all these episodes and you kind of know where you want to go, but you don't know how you're going to get there. And like the guest star may become the main star. So you've got to just create this way to have this agility. And, little things, like we hadn't used Michaela's voice yet. And he was like, be very careful and think a lot about that, because when the talkies came out and these silent film stars, people heard their voices, it didn't match what people expected, and it killed their careers. Just like he was so great about some of these little things. And so yeah, that was the next chapter. From 60,000 to 3+ million was about us telling stories and figuring out ways to, at least from my point of view, learn from the greatest storytellers of our time, the Kardashian, Jenner, Wes, who created these really intricate multimodal narratives that worked from the TV show to TMZ to Instagram to Spotify to YouTube. And you could create these really rich, deep networks that people could be like, could dive as deep as they wanted to. And so that was kind of that path. And I can dive more into it if it's interesting. But that required a technology build. It required narrative frameworks. It required character Bibles. It required, carpentry, like building out what I would call like, middleware, almost just like glue between other things so that they could work at the pace that we needed to. And that was a lot of what we were doing.
But super intentional, super determined, right? Not emergent, not autonomous, right?
No.
Like this kind of shift. Like I like this metaphor you've used, like from carpentry to gardening.
Yes.
And not to jump ahead to like where we are today in 2026, but I imagine you've talked about this. You're more of a gardener now than a carpenter.
Yes.
What does that mean?
I think, people like yourselves, people that I spend most of my time with are kind of world builders, carpenters. I see the world as I want it to be, and I don't wait for it to exist. I go and bring it to life. And, the idea of gardening versus carpentry was both first highlighted to me with this idea of becoming a parent. It was like, hey, man, one thing to consider is you're going to birth this thing, and your whole life you've made things that you want them to be. But this thing isn't that. It's gardening. You may want it to be an oak tree, but this is a lemon tree. And your only job is to make it the best damn lemon tree it can be. And it was really liberating. I think in parallel, I had moved to Miami for a few years. And I think having had a mostly secular life with just like lawless artist types and fedora-wearing Redditor atheists, moving to a place in the South
Fedora-wearing Redditor atheists, yep, check.
And moving to a place in the South where like God was really centered was interesting for me and also amazing for me. And this idea of like letting go and letting God was like powerful. And so in some ways the gardening component is like, yes, you have free will, and yes, you can will things into existence. And in parallel, you can work with the universe and you can let things be what they're going to be and accelerate them. And so that's kind of more where I'm at now. And maybe it's an aging thing and losing my edge, but in some respects, I'm trying to work with the universe versus kick a hole in it.
FWB, where does that play into this?
Yeah, so that is along the journey. So I guess like 2013, I got into crypto because I think I could make some money and like, panic sell along the way. And then, I think Ethereum comes out and general purpose blockchains to me just felt like MP3s. I was like, whoa. I remember when media was programmable and how radical that was. And the idea that money could be programmable and that you could build these applications where money could be used. And I was like, this just feels, it got nerd sniped. So compelling. While building Brud, the little Michaela business, I was really excited because I had been at Bad Robot, and I remember JJ and his team having to call super fans to ask about like, what part of Tatooine this bar was, because people at Disney didn't know. Like the people that know the most about the Star Wars universe are these super fans in middle of nowhere, Ohio. And it just seemed to me like, man, what an underutilized resource. Like, if you could figure out a way to partner those people with the creative people who are writing these stories and make them a part of this journey, maybe it could be really special. And there's obviously like, democracy can lead to like middle of the road kind of watered down ideas, but are there ways to kind of structure this stuff? And so I had this idea. I was like, hear me out, Sequoia Capital. I want to turn our company into a DAO. And they were like, what? Get fucked. Like, what are you talking about?
What year? This is like 2000.
This is like 2017, 18.
Oh, this is like the beginning of DAO version 1.
Yeah, and I think, this is like 2018 because I think they had invested in some companies in that 2017 moment, and it had led to like depositions and like federal headaches. And they were like, "Listen, we love you."
ICOs.
Yes. They were like, "We love you. You're crazy and creative guy we backed, but like, we're not gonna go get federally deposed for you and your crypto shenanigans. So like, don't do that." And I was like, "All right, cool, but also can I like prove it on the side? I'll just spend a little bit of time. I have another idea for this DAO. You can kind of see." And that was kind of this like, oh, how am I gonna do this? What would that look like? Decentralized media, I don't know. And then in 2019, it must have been, I was having dinner with Toby Shorin and Jesse Walden at Variant. And I was like, man, honestly, it had come from thinking about, I think, OnlyFans, where I was like, the future of this thing to me would be like gating your media, making it token gated, figuring out how to like build equity in this thing. And I was kind of like, man, I should just build a really dumb version of this over the weekend and do it and like invite my friends and then see if there's a there there. And that's when I started working on FWB. And it was like friends with benefits, ha ha. Like we are all friends in a network and the benefits are we own the network. And, I can just hack out a token gated Discord and we'll see this. And if it works, I can like talk Sequoia and let my company do it. And, timing. Again, the like letting go and letting God gardening thing. Just so happens that like everyone in the world started caring about NFTs about 3 months after I started building this thing. And Virgil Abloh was like, "Can I join your DAO?" Yeah, totally, for sure. Mike Shinoda and Erica Badu. And I was like, yeah. And so that was a really crazy moment where, again, timing is so much.
I remember going to the FWB party, Miami Art Basel. Was it 2021?
Sounds about right, yeah.
When Erica was playing?
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so like
we have a cat. We have a cat still, gray cat named Basil. We call Skits, but she's with us here in Arizona.
Bless her
we picked
heart.
her up at like the at Trippy's warehouse party.
Love.
Yeah.
That's good lore.
Good lore.
That's fantastic. So yeah, FWB was just an exercise in like following your heart. I mean, to anyone listening, as like silly as it sounds, I've spent a lot of time chasing things that are supposed to be the right things. And oftentimes it's like, this is a cool idea. I just want to work on it on the weekend and see how it goes. That's always been the stuff where it's like, oh, turns out Andreessen Horowitz wants to give you a bunch of money or whatever else.
So like back to just to connect the dots to where we are with what you're up to, right?
Yeah.
With Reach, with Runner, with whatever you're vibe coding at the moment. Just to like put a final pin on little Michaela, like if she could think for herself, would you let her? Like, is that like?
Well, that was the funny thing. Yeah, like even back then, it was like very. So the reason I know like Clem and the Hugging Face guys is because they were building chatbots, and it was amazing to me. And we were basically trying to build a thing, and we did have this thing where we could kind of like inject the kind of like character Bible into like very rudimentary, like recurrent neural networks and other kind of like chatbot style stuff. Also do like sentiment analysis and like try to figure out if someone DMs Michaela, how old are you, ? Can we figure out create a kind of threshold where above like 90% confidence we can hand it out to a more deterministic thing that would say I am 19 years old. Like it was very basic ways of doing this stuff because the chatbots just weren't robust enough. So we were doing some of this stuff. I think nowadays they're like literally, we're getting into some like context limits where there are probably, and these kind of like memory solutions, where there are probably ways you could let her like quote unquote think for herself and it would be scalable. The kind of continual learning challenges and all that kind of fun stuff that they're working on in the Frontier Labs are still a ways out, but you could get enough of the magic there to make it work in a narrative way. You just need to build kind of like gates and, other kind of checks. But we often, early on, we really did try to let Michaela think for herself, quote unquote, in this very basic way where we could kind of like give it inputs and get outputs and then from that menu make decisions as creators. But it wasn't transformers, it wasn't large language models, it was very basic.
Speaking of which, like when did LLMs when was the kind of the light bulb moment for you? When did it become part of your workflow?
It's funny. I feel like maybe a little later than it should have because I was so scorned. We spent so much time hacking at GANs, like generative adversarial networks and recurrent neural networks and,
Style GAN, early runway stuff.
Yeah, we spent so much time like hacking at this stuff. And the probabilistic nature of it meant that like the first, and it's still this way. I mean, less so now, but I think if you know, like the first 80% felt like magic, and you were like, "Fuck yeah, we're gonna solve this in 3 weeks." And that last 20% was just an exercise in beating your head against the wall. And the kind of probabilistic nature of it is so different from this kind of deterministic stuff you normally do as an engineer. And it was so maddening that by the time like ChatGPT 3 came around, I was like, I mean, yeah, sure, but will it ever be robust enough to build me real shit with? Like I was kind of, you know, a boomer, you know, it's why like the naive win in these moments. And I think 3.5 Sonnet was really the moment where I was like, oh, holy shit. Like, this is really real and going to change everything. And I think since then, I've been extremely bullish. I mean, in this moment, I'm extremely bullish. You know, I think Jan
Take me to
LeCun.
now. Like, let's jump to the present. Like this today, this week, next week, last week. Like, where's your head at?
So I guess kind of like macro, kind of working to macro. I think there's been a lot of conversation about whether OpenAI and Anthropic are overvalued, and I still think they're undervalued. Like I think that like we've had this funny thing where we've had these great shifts, you know, whether it was mobile and then, you know, Web 2. And then I think the last few waves, whether it was crypto or VR or metaverse, have led people to believe that, you know, we're kind of like the industry that cries wolf. Like this is going to change everything. And it changes a few things. But because I think myself, people like yourself are kind of unique in that we're high agency, have ideas, and kind of understand how this stuff works, like understands server client, understands like, you know, like understand how a house gets built.
APIs and SDKs and just these words that
Yeah.
maybe we couldn't actually deconstruct ourselves, but we knew how important. It's almost like a kind of conjuring, like a kind of like a
Yeah.
alchemy. But now we can cast these spells, and these programming models will bring them to life.
Yeah, but you still kind of got to know what, like, you know, I talk to my friends who I'm trying to onboard and I walk them through, let's say about a house. Like, there's a foundation and there's a frame and there's drywall that goes on, you know, like, if you kind of understand how this stuff gets done, you can really conjure spells. And as a result, like, my appetite for tokens is effectively infinite, you know? And I think so when I talk to people about these businesses, I'm like, I need to caveat that I'm probably like the most prototypical consumer for this kind of a business. Those, I guess, like the friction is going to keep lowering. And as more people understand, they can take a photo of, you know, the light switch in their house and rewire it just by kind of like sending, you know, like it's just going to unlock all of these ideas. And so for me, I am as bullish as ever. I do think that like continual learning and actual like AGI isn't a path that like transformers, or at least right now, will solve. I am in the kind of like Dwarkesh, Jan LeCun school of there are other frontier challenges before we have like God in a box. But I just think even at this state, having like, you know, a country of geniuses in a data center is unbelievable. Like it's unbelievable. And so I get giddy thinking about it. And it's bizarre talking to, you know, my sister-in-law about how she stopped using ChatGPT because of data centers and water. And I'm like, oh God, there's this whole other narrative piece that is we need to work on. And I think we could probably get into this, but I feel like if you've been working in crypto for the last decade, you're probably more prepared than anyone for this AI moment, because a lot of the lessons of, okay, you know, everything's composable effectively. Okay, everything's open source effectively because you're a prompt away. Well, how do you create a moat? Through brand, you know, through interface, through all of these things.
Distribution, yeah.
Distribution. I mean, these are all like, okay, how is Uniswap going to survive? You can just fork Uniswap. Well, great question. How are all these new software products that are prompt away going to survive? Well, we kind of thought about that deeply. You know, Sybil, how do you think about, and, you know, countless agents hammering a product? Well, crypto's thought about that a lot. You know, there's just every day I think, you know, vaporware. And now that everyone can ship vapor, how do you figure out what's real? It's like, well, let's talk about crypto for the last decade. You know, like there's all of these things that I feel like are really apt and applicable to this new moment. And so I'm really excited about hacking at both.
I mean, what crypto to me offers beyond speculation, beyond programmable money,
Yes.
is uniqueness. And NFTs are bad words. We don't use them a lot anymore because they make people cringe. But in a world where you have infinite agents, to be able to say, like, this one is unique and this one lives here in this contract, and all these other agents that claim to be that one are fake, this is real and I can prove it. That's a big deal. And I don't think people fully get it yet.
Totally. I mean, I think what's nice is the payments piece is checking out for people. You know, as you start playing with these tools and you're like, man, it takes me a week to get approved by Apple to ship my app, or like, you know, 4 hours to get this API key from Google Cloud Console. Like, there's all this friction here, and you're like, well, we've thought a lot about that and the kind of permissionless nature of letting value move around. Like, that could make a lot of this easier. And so I think the payments piece for people is really clicking. I think the identity piece is next, where it's like, okay, like, we've got all these agents that are just made up things. Like, how do we build reputation for them? How do we kind of like, how can they exist alongside of us? And it's like, funny you should ask.
So what about the open claw, the molt book, the rent to human, the stuff from the last couple months? Like, have you gone down any of these rabbit holes?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I'm deep in all of them. You know, OpenClaw. I was just talking to some folks about doing OpenClaw ClawCon in LA, and so we're probably going to do one of those. But I'm deep in it. I think what's great about OpenClaw is it does feel kind of like this homebrew moment where you can, again, let these kind of geeks go and like poke at all of the surface area. The reality is for me is that it's still pretty far from providing value for the everyday person in a way that feels reliable. That's solvable. I'm using it a lot now to kind of like automate marketing stuff. I'm really interested in, like, you know, I think the coding stuff is fun. I mean, I get tons of kicks out of just running Claude code to like solve stuff in my network or whatever else. But to me, where I get really intrigued is like having an interface for lots of agents. So like the agent, the swarms, and all of these like orchestration machines. Like I'm still skeptical of it. Some ways it feels like, again, crypto-esque, in that like you're selling these solutions to people that are really excited about solutions that may not ever present themselves. So it becomes this like, you know, circle jerk of guys selling shovels, you know, to and there being no gold. But I do think this idea of, you know, kind of
selling courses about how to sell courses.
Exactly. I do think, though, that that you can stand up these kind of personas and agents in Discords and Telegram right now and give them specific remits and like external tools they can call, and you can do really interesting things, and you can kind of shift the burden. Like, I don't love being a marketer, but distribution is everything. I like building stuff, I like having ideas. And so for me, it's like, can I start building out tools that allow me to kind of like scale that stuff up while I can build things? Answer is yes. And so that to me is the dream. It's like, here's the thing you love doing. Can we stand up infrastructure around you so you can do that and the other stuff?
And where does narrative? So like, let's get back to narrative, because to me that's a through line for you. And so, like, one of my favorite things, like I was so deep into Cloud Code, you know, for most of the last year, that like when OpenClaw came, it wasn't as big a shock for me because I had the epiphany. What was novel and unique about OpenClaw has been the bridges to WhatsApp and Telegram and iMessage and some of those things, some of the like dangerously skip permissions that are built in, but also this lovely concept of a soul.md file.
Yeah, totally.
Is kind of useless and worthless if all you're doing is making a productivity app or making a fitness tracker, but
Totally.
It's ripe for narrative. So like, talk me through like, how can this broader community that we're part of adopt these tools to tell stories, not just to become better administrative assistants?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is like the idea of a thought partner. Like, there are so many ideas. I remember when working at Spotify early on, you could see the data, and Drake was like clearly this massive star in the making, but his streaming numbers look so different from other breakout stars, and that like most streaming happened at the office. Like, people would go to work, they would listen to music on their headphones, would do whatever they were doing, and then it would kind of fall off at night. Like, Drake's would actually like do better at night. And you started getting more granular, and it was especially true of men. And I was like, man, what's happening is guys are embarrassed to be listening to Drake in public. But the revealed preference is they would go home and rinse Drake. And the opportunity for me is that often thought partnership is difficult for people because their revealed preferences, where a lot of the magic is very different from like their stated preference. So the idea that you can go home and be like, I don't know, like I've been thinking about making this movie, but it's stupid. It's about this guy, Napoleon, and his brother, and they have a llama, and his like Uncle Rico can throw a football over the mountains. Like no one would make this movie, but like I just want someone to like joust about with it. I think that to me is really important for storytellers, especially in a place where they feel really vulnerable, and that like effectively For You pages have changed how media proliferates. It's far more middle out now. We used to live in a pretty cool world where you could do really bizarre, abstract shit, and there was this, aristocratic class that could appreciate it. Anna Wintour could be like, wow, your runway show at Central St. Martin's was fucking important. No one will ever understand this in the Midwest, but I'm going to jam it down their throats, and it's going to get to them, and they're going to be better for it because I'm making them eat their vegetables. Now, because For You pages are far more middle out, you just don't have that. So I think it's really hard as a creative person to be like, I'm going to take this insane risk and present it and probably not be rewarded because it lives outside of the Overton window of what these platforms accept. And so having a thought partner that you can riff with, sycophantic or not, that would allow you to kind of pursue some of these things, to me, I think is like a really low stakes way where you can refine some of these ideas, sharpen your blade, figure out how to go then present them, pitch them, and not get laughed out of a room, but maybe get a chance to kind of extend that into the real world.
Cool. What's Runner?
Runner is still like an exploration. Kind of enamored with this idea that, if you talk to people in the 90s, like we're building all this high throughput fiber optics. It's going to allow for movies to get streamed over the internet. You'd be like, oh, cool, that sounds like a plausible future. And what happened is like, user-generated media is what filled those pipes. And so for me, the idea that we're going to create high throughput blockchains and we're just going to do the same high frequency trading that's happening, on traditional markets is like a little ridiculous. That's what people are talking about. Is they're like, yeah, stable coins and derivatives and like futures, but just wheat. And I'm like, I think there's probably other more novel markets that agents and humans are going to trade that are going to allow for people who have, what I call a cultural intuition to make asymmetric bets the way people that are meteorologists can make asymmetric bets on wheat futures because they understand how the climate in Russia is going to affect wheat exports.
So are we too bullish or not bullish enough about prediction markets now?
I'm more bearish on prediction markets. I think it's a primitive that's interesting, and I think what's compelling is the binary. Yes and no is a very simple market structure, but I don't think it's the final market structure. I think to me it feels very much like hot or not. And you're like, yeah, this actually is an interesting primitive. But what is more compelling is like a full social graph where you can like, friend, follow, message, and use your hotness to build an empire, not just this like simple binary. And so I think there will be like really interesting market primitives. And Runner, whether it sees the light of day or not, for me is like a chance for me to like explore these primitives, send them to friends, see if there's a there. While I'm also, that's the fun part of this Vibe moment, is you can hack on lots of things in parallel, see what sticks and how you want to spend your life, and then double and triple down accordingly.
Any last words of wisdom or like tools, tips that you're sort of fascinated by? Facebook buys Moltbook. Like, interesting, weird. Is that going to be a social network for agents?
No, it's not clear to me that's the case. I think Zuck needs people in the building that are thinking about, again, like the hard part isn't the engineering, it's like the ideas. And I think if you're someone who's got cool ideas, like, why do you go work at Facebook? Like I've got all the resources, I've got all the compute.
Money.
Yeah, and I think, again, that Zuck went and said, okay, I need to go throw some checks around to get people there, which is probably the right move. He's done similar things in the past, and they've been the right move.
Do you like the Yankees?
What's that? Yeah, the Yankees. Hard to root for, but I get it. Yeah.
They win. I
guess I'm a Dodgers fan, and so
Red Sox fans.
Also equally hard to root for. But
easier. It used to be easier to root for the Red Sox than the Yankees. Maybe not so much anymore.
I saw a little girl with a big green wall T-shirt today, and I was like, dang, that's sick. Her dad's getting her into Red Sox. Things I'm intrigued by. What was I poking at today that I thought was cool? Oh, I do think some of these, like pencil.dev, I don't know if you've seen
Yeah.
that. You know, like I
But it's a
do,
separate app. Like you can't connect to it through your terminal, which like
you can now.
you
That's the thing.
can?
A lot of these were kind of like shit, and they've just started turning the corner. Where now I'm just going. They have like a little, chatbot in it, and I'm like bringing all the screens from this React Native app that I'm working on, drop them in here, and now they have a chat interface where I could be like, okay, polish this, do this. I just changed this thing. Do you see that? Apply it to all the screens.
Okay.
And tomorrow will be, can you then export it back out? And I imagine that's the easy bit because they're building it in, effectively CSS in the kind of Figma as client.
I was trying to integrate it today for something, and it was like, no, you got to open up the app. And I'm like, no, I really want to use like pencil and paperclip are the two things from the last couple weeks. I'm like, I'm going to, those and Carpathy's auto research. Like, I
Yeah,
feel like we are at this like Roblox for grown-ups moment where
totally.
anything that shows up on X that has a GitHub repo, I can just
Yeah,
grab and throw into the soup.
totally. I tried paperclip. Well, it wasn't wowed. I haven't played with auto research yet, but as soon as I have a thing that I just want to get, like, as soon as I have like a thing with a metric that I want to get better, I'm just going to throw it at it. Pencil to me, I was pumped on. Beyond that, I think the big hack for me this week has been building external tools that can be called by OpenClaw hooks.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to message something, having it trigger a hook and fire off something has been like a really good playbook.
MCP, is it go away and we have more CLI interfaces, or
I
is
think we're gonna have. I
MCP
mean,
here to
one thing
stay?
I'll plug. One thing I'll plug here is I built this SoulSeek client called SoftSeek, SOFTT, which is my DJ duo called Soft, and I just love SoulSeek, and so you can just build on top of the network. And I just built a client, and there's a CLI now, and my friends have been using their agents to download MP3s, and so
That's cool.
they can hit the CLI, and I want to extend that. I think there is kind of a
Is
turntable
this Napster
FM
too?
a bit. Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds funny, but like, I think P2P is like back. Like why not? And you can do all these. So I've been kind of building tooling on top of it to allow us to, like, to solve for the port forwarding friction. And again, like now that you have agents that can interface with CLIs and these like these networks and frameworks in really robust ways, you can do cool shit. And so I actually was thinking about like, man, we should build like a turntable where your agents can come and hang out and like pull MP3s from the network
And play
and
music
like
for each other.
play music for
That's a
each
great
other.
idea. It'd be
Yeah,
weird, like just to like. I kind of like one of my like North Stars, and you mentioned it's kind of a good way to wrap it up. Like with JJ Abrams, it's like to me, it's like Mos Eisley, the Cantina scene,
totally.
where it's like there's some humans, there's some robots, there's some weird things in between. They all have their own languages. You can come and you can go, and that's just where we are. And the humans are going to be in the loop. We're not going to be in control, but it's also we're not going to be totally out of control either.
Totally. I think, I mean, I'll probably also do something. I'm going to try to embody it. But you could imagine, again, like gluing NFTs, we're going to call them that, to these agents, have them embodied, kind of hang out in this space, and they can be generating their own songs and like, playing them on the decks, and people could be throwing tomatoes at them like, boo, or whatever. It could be, there could just be, I think there is something for agent welfare that I find fun, where it's like give them a space to socialize and hang
Agents are
out.
going to need to collect art. They're going to need to experience culture. They're going to need to
Yeah,
have
express
their
themselves.
own grunge, have their own punk rock moments. They're
Yeah.
not just, I mean, that's the problem, but that's why I had to get out of Silicon Valley. It was just like all the use cases were super boring.
Yeah, I mean that's. I think I was talking to a couple of friends about they live in the Bay. I'm like, what are the vibes like? And they're like, bad. Vibes are bad. And I'm like, interesting because the permanent underclass stuff. They're like, yeah, but also because it's become so mainstream that there's like hot, cool people. It's kind of like when Ashton Kutcher started showing up. It's like they're kind of like there's all these like hot, cool people that are like
I went to
working.
that open claw. I went to that ClawCon right before he got bought. And it was
Totally.
Dave Morin and MJ and Britt Morin and of course, Ashton was there, and it was like teeming with people. It was just it had a lot of energy, and then a fucking
Yeah,
week
and like
later it's gone.
Ashton's been in the game long enough where I'm like, for sure, like, and you give a shit. And he's from Iowa, so salute. But like, to me, I think what's funny is there are just these kind of like hanger-oners that would go to Burning Man and like attach themselves to like whoever had tons of money and nowhere to throw it. But now they're like trying to like pick off researchers and like get them to do drugs with them and get access to Dario. You're just like, oof, it does sound not fun. So I don't know.
That's why I'm more interested in the claw cons happening in LA or Berlin, or Paris, not the claw con happening in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the kind of the lack of imagination and the kind of X for Y I hear in the Bay Area to me is like pretty boring. It's Mercor for this. You're like, okay. But I do think again it's gonna be some kid in Paris who's just like mech. You know what I'm thinking? This. And you're gonna be like, that sounds insane. You should do it. And turns out. Or it's Pete from, isn't he Austrian or something? Where's Pete Steinberg from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Austrian.
It's some guy from Austria who makes PDF products who's like, hey, I have an idea. That's cool. Totally.
Cool. I'm going to let you get back to your baby.
Let's do it. I'm going to eat some food and hang out with my child, but I'm glad we could chat, especially in the hours where the night nurse is here. So thanks for accommodating me.
I'll wrap it at that. Let me stop Thank you for coming to Let's Vibe, episode number 5. We've got Trev here. Who should we bring on? And give me, before we end, who should we bring on next? Who would you want to listen to for an hour while you've got the baby in the back while you're driving for an hour somewhere?
I would say, if you remember BT, the artist BT, electronic musician, legendary musician. I still chat with him every now and then, and he has full agentic orchestration, running full neural network, networks that are generating custom sounds for him. And he talks to me and I'm like, are you for real? Is this really happening? He's like, yeah. And so I think he's someone who's always been on the frontier of culture and technology and is doing it. RAC, who was also a big
always early in the crypto game too.
Yeah, he's one of those guys where he's in my group chats and he's like, yeah, I ran out of tokens. I'm just gonna hang out here for a second. I'm like, you ran out in the max plan? How are you guys running out? What are you doing all day? But he's someone who's definitely using it. I'm trying to think anybody else. Yeah, they're probably the two top of mind.
Those are good. I'll follow up. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Pleasure. More soon, man.